Hello and welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. And in today's video, I have a very special guest here today. It is Chris Street, and we're going to be talking about the economic future of California. Normally, I do the economic future series as countries, and I compare them to U.S. states, but California is our most populous state, has the sway that is bigger than many countries in the world. So, Chris, let's just start. Tell us more about your background and why you are especially qualified to talk about this particular subject.
Well, Nick, I started out, not expecting to be involved that much in California. I was an investment banker and what was called a block trader. And through my experience in trading stocks and big positions in stocks and bonds, I realized that, trying to beat analysts by predicting 2 cents more earnings was pretty much a sucker's game. And so I got interested in being involved in distressed companies. And through that process, I ended up being the largest buyer of bankruptcy claims in the United States for a period of around 10 years. And through that process, I lived in Newport Beach. And lo and behold, because of my sort of reputation around town, some of the ladies from the local schools came up to me and said, Chris, we think there's a problem in the school's finances. And, I didn't know much about school finances. So I went to a school board meeting in Newport Mesa, the richest school district on the planet, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you went to Newport Mesa, right?
Yeah, I had 7 years of my education there.
The finest private school on the planet is a public school called Corona Del Mar High School. It's just the best. So anyway, here I am, a Wall Street guy, and I go to a school board meeting, and for some reason, this is the day they're passing out the budget. And we'd had a scandal in Newport Beach. The treasurer had embezzled money and was buying impressionist art, had 2 million of impressionist art before he got caught. So I'm here at a school board meeting, and it's, and there's really nobody else there except for me in a suit. I'm looking around, and they hand me a budget, and there are, 7 school board trustees in a half circle. And underneath them are a bunch of professionals, obviously lawyers, accountants, whatever. And I'm looking at the budget, and you get your chance to stand up and speak. I stand up and speak, go to the podium and say, this budget isn't balanced. You don't have the cash for this year's school. And all the guys in the front, the professionals turned around with their mouths open. The trustees were shocked. And there was a lot of that. And it turns out that the Newport Mesa School District, the chief financial officer, who made $70,000 a year, you'll get this, owned 9 houses, drove a Rolls-Royce convertible, had been embezzling from the school's health and welfare plan, many millions per year. And I found out that the school didn't want to fess up to this, so they worked with the county treasurer, a guy named Bob Citron, to borrow money, leverage it up, invest in take short-term cash and invest it in long-term bonds and live off the interest spread. And that got me to call the treasurer of Orange County, who I actually did business with on the pension plan. But I had no idea he had these side deals he was doing. And then I found out he wasn't just doing a little side deal, Nick. He had taken $6 billion of basically payroll, leveraged it up to $26 billion. I asked this guy, don't you know if interest rates go up, these bonds would go down? And he goes, yeah. And I go, how do you know interest rates aren't going to go up? And he told me, I'm the largest short-term investor in America. I know these things. that started me off to, trying to run down all of the crazy stuff that was going on in Orange County. By the way, the most conservative, most Republican county in the country. And the newspapers attacked me. Everybody attacked me because they were using this system to get more money and spend more money on special projects. And lo and behold, on December 5th, 1994, Orange County, a AA credit, filed bankruptcy.
Yeah, so this is for those people who are not familiar with local Orange County finance. This is the great Orange County scandal of 1994 that was famous on Wall Street.
Right. And I'd done an article for Barron's, which is a part of the Wall Street Journal, and it came out on, supposed to be published Monday, but of course everything gets leaked over the weekend. And before it was published on Monday, they already had a cash crisis, and those people who loaned, essentially the county, $22 billion, wanted their money back, and Orange County went into bankruptcy. And so that's how I got involved in, California finances. Later on, I became the treasurer of the county. And in 2009 and 2010, as the treasurer of the county, I sat on the 5-member treasurer advisory panel for the state treasurer, a guy named Bill Lockyer. And we basically made payroll for 2 years for the state of California.
That was a challenge back then.
Well, what I learned, everybody laughs at the train to nowhere in California, the high-speed rail. What you don't understand is we were trying to make payroll, and Jerry Brown found out that if he promised to make a bullet train, if he promised to spend $2.7 billion at some point in the future, that he could get money to start a bullet train in California, $8.3 billion. And a week later, it was wire transferred to the state. And the moment they got the money, that was the end of talking about cutting spending. And they just, they're back to their spending spree.
All right. So speaking of California, the first topic we want to talk about is a video that I did a few months ago called San Francisco is the Next Detroit, how I compare basically the combination of demographics, technological change, not requiring a certain industry to be located in the same metro, and a strong history of progressive politics in both metros like Detroit in the 60s and San Francisco today is kind of causing a similar breakdown in terms of population and economics. So do you think that the comparison to San Francisco and Detroit is apt, or the West Coast and the Rust Belt is appropriate, or am I underestimating the resilience of the Bay Area?
Well, I thought it was the most hilarious, tagline. San Francisco is the new Detroit, or as we say, and in the Midwest they say Detroit. Not a kind word, because Detroit went from 2.7 million people to 700,000. From the late 60s and early 70s, when it had some of the highest income and wealth on the planet.
Yeah, it was number 4th big wealthiest city in America, just like the Bay Area today, and had the highest GDP per capita of any city,
right.
The Bay Area back 5 years ago.
And that's really the problem. What happened? Well, what happened in the 1970s in California is, their game of getting liberal politicians to spend money finally crashed with the fact that people were pulling out of the state because of the technology of the time. The defense industry was moving to Texas. The auto industry was falling apart and all that. And so Jerry Brown, who was governor back in the 70s, cut spending on infrastructure from 17% of the budget, Nick, to 3%. And the idea was, we'll get back to it later. Well, they never got back to it, but lo and behold, it turns out it was a brilliant, stupid move. And the brilliance of the stupid move was, all of a sudden, China came on, All these jobs got outsourced to China, and California, three big industries, Silicon Valley, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which handles over 60% of the container cargoes in the United States, and the entertainment industry absolutely boomed because they were the point in the US where all these Chinese imports were coming in and all this intellectual property and entertainment was going out from the US. So the Midwest was devastated, became the Rust Belt, and California, that 40 miles along the coast, absolutely boomed. And we went on just a tear, and the state spending went bonkers because they could. But it's 40 years later, Nick.
Yeah. So, like, what is your outcome for Northern California the next 40 to 50 years?
Well, I think it's all California, really. It's that 40-mile coast from probably, the wine country down to Orange County. All of that got an incredible, spike in economic activity that led the country. And unfortunately, last I checked, China is becoming not only an economic threat to the United States, but is now being defined as a military threat. The last I checked, missiles were flying towards Taiwan. 2 aircraft aircraft carrier battle groups, are now on station and running hot. So the outsource of jobs to China and the insource, I guess, of entertainment and technology to China are coming to an end. Nick, I'll give you the most important statistic on this. In 2019, 50% of all the tickets sold in the world to Hollywood's blockbuster movies were sold in China. Last year, it was 10%. It'll be 8 or 7 this year. So that game came. It's kind of like the tide came in and all the boats floated along that San Francisco and such, and the tide's going out. And I don't think these people have the capacity to handle change.
So then what would be the new industries then to support the state if tech is outflowing due to work remote, if trade with Asia is outflowing due to geopolitics, and real estate, which I think is the other one that I think you forgot to mention, is outflowing due to too high prices for the locals and a lack of immigration to make up for it. So what are the industries that are going to drive California in the future if the entertainment, as you mentioned before, the 4 pillars are crumbling? What do we have left here, or what's going to take over its place?
Well, that's the point, Nick, is that, remember during World War II, 63% of all the airplanes were built in California. There are no airplane factories here. There, and you take a look at the big auto industry that's all gone. The good news is it's all gone and it can come back. The bad news is the politics here are bad. And, you now have what's supposed to be an economic, recovery, and people had low interest rates. They bought houses. It was all going to be really good. I'm going to give you the most grim statistic you've heard in a long time. Unemployment in California dropped from 7.4% in July of 2021 to 3.8% in July of 2022. Tax collection is down 12.1% for the same month.
That's just showing you that basically the people who are moving out are the wealthier and the more productive, and the people moving in are retirees.
Retirees or, illegal aliens, whatever you want to call them. The bottom line to it is, it's kind of like, remember a movie called Blazing Saddles where they have a boom town, it's a gold rush, they all get drunk and have a good time, and then it pans out, and then they all leave town kind of sad?
Yeah.
Isn't that California?
On a bigger scale, possibly. Like I call this the garage sale effect. I live
Yeah.
in Southern California and I see garage sales every week. And I go there to check what's up out. And I ask the people why are they selling all their stuff? And usually the answer is a parent died who lived in the property, and the kids have moved to another state and have had their own families there and established their lives. And the first thing they got to do is get rid of the stuff before they sell the house. So far, it's been a lot of retirees from New York, New Jersey, and Chicago who have filled the gap. But as demographics continue to change, as the state gets older and older in population and the country gets older and older in population, who's going to be that new buyer when the boomers pass? Is this going to be what happened to Japan in the 90s in real estate? Is that what you can expect for California real estate in the
Well,
2020s?
I think real estate is a defined term. It's always location, location, location. It used to be location, location, location in that 40-mile strip, of the coast. But that's the biggest loser in this change. I think real estate's doing better in Central California and way up north. Anything from Fresno to Redding is doing much, much better. But the bottom line to all this is a state that was the number one manufacturing, capital of the United States, and being that, it was the manufacturing capital pretty much of the world. And we drove it away by our policy of not investing in infrastructure. Now you're perfectly ready for that manufacturing to come back. You've got agriculture could really boom. You've got, you used to be the number 2 producer of oil. All that could boom, but the policies, are blamed on environmentalism. The real issue, Nick, is they can't come back because they haven't built the infrastructure. Not in detail, not something that can be politically changed quickly. You have to spend a tremendous amount of money. And the state of California, when your revenues from taxes are payroll taxes are going down 12%, and your unemployment rate has been cut in half, that tells you have an existential crisis.
So then the question I have is then what is going to be done about it? I mean, is basically high energy prices going to hurt the environmentalist movement enough for reforms to happen? Or is this just going to be a gradual thing like what happened with Michigan? Michigan used to be the California of its time, the most progressive state in the union. And then in 2016, it voted for Donald Trump and has had Republicans take the governorship and the state legislature multiple times since the 1990s. And it's become gradually more competitive. I think the real turnaround point in the case of Michigan was Detroit's bankruptcy back in 2008. Is it going to take something like that to really just a financial shock to straighten out this state? Or can proactive leadership within either the state politics or the local private sector do something to turn it around? Because the boom in the 2010s was nothing to do with the state. It was the private sector creating Web 2.0 and all the derivatives of that is what made us prosperous. So what are your thoughts? Like, what's it going to take for California to turn around? And if they do, how is that going to happen?
Well, there's the saying on Wall Street, don't try to catch a falling knife. There's a better one that says, don't try to catch a falling safe. Because these problems, the budget in California, is bigger than countries. I got to tell you, they basically spend $230 billion of what's called the general fund. This is their California taxes. But they get another $170 billion from the federal government. And you add those together, there's $400 billion of spending a year here. And that's up from about $150 billion 15 years ago. So, inflation hasn't been 300% and the economy hasn't got 300% better. But now you're in a situation where, you and by the way, you didn't pay for any infrastructure. They haven't built a dam in 40 years here. 6 have been approved by the federal government. They haven't built a dam. They've closed power plants. We need 27 to 30 natural gas power plants today, and the state is closing them. So I think, Nick, that you have in California, and this is going to be a radical concept, we always lead the United States in both directions, on the upside and on the downside. Americans need to get hit in the face, not with a 2x4, but like with a 6x6, finally so big that they finally change. And so I think California is that place that right now is about to get hit with a 6x6. I think that the state is literally going to be, because I was on a committee in 2010 to make payroll here. I know what the numbers are. You have a state that by October, which is their lowest cash point of the year, cash comes up a little bit and then goes down again to February. Between October and February, this state is on the verge of an existential default, not existential financial crisis, default. And I don't see how they stop it. Personally, I think this is a good thing for America.
And then, do you think there'll be a divergence at all regionally in California? Is it just going to be the coast and the interior have different performance, or will metropolitan areas such as San Diego, Orange County, and LA have a different economic outlook than, say, San Francisco or Sacramento or Fresno?
Well, it's where the money went, and this is, we're not going to have a banking crisis. Each one of these cycles, each one of these recessions, whatever you want to call it, have some industry that gets taken out. It was the banking industry in 2007. It was tech in 1999, 2000. My dad was an engineer in the 1970s and made rockets. He was one of 165 engineers at a place called United Technologies in Santa Clara, and he had a boss. And a year and a half later, there were 3 engineers and he was the boss. Now, that's really high impact. So I think what you're going to find is the crisis is going to be very severe in government and those people that live on government. And remember, the cities get most, if not almost all, of the government money. I mean, the reason they stopped doing infrastructure is so they could send more dollars to, where their voters, Democrat voters, were in the inner city. So I think inner cities, and San Francisco included, do not make financial sense going forward. There's some elements that are good about cities, but I'm telling you, on a business basis, San Francisco, Los Angeles are both on the same slip and slide that Detroit was. All of a sudden, it was absolutely on top, and 3 years later, it was collapsing. And it took another 10 years to go bankrupt. But
I'm a little more optimistic. I think Los Angeles's trajectory is more like Chicago's, which is not great, but Chicago's still a major important world city, and is still the 3rd largest metropolitan area in America and does a lot of things, just not as prominent as it was 50 years ago.
Okay, Nick, let me just tell you the difference between Chicago and Los Angeles and San Francisco. California has 10.5% of the population in the United States. It gets over 15% of federal spending. What a deal, right? So that means that every other state in the country gets less because California gets more. Now, you've got Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. If you get a political loss in such a way that Nancy isn't Speaker, or that there's a rebellion in her own Democratic ranks, I can tell you that every other state hates California, and they're going to take that 15% back to 10.5%, and that's coming like a freight train. So all that money it's like going to be a sucking sound out of the cities, mostly of Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Francisco. I think this vacuum of cash moving, these big sort of waves of cash moving, are going to absolutely be pinpointed in the big cities.
And so then based on that, the one thing in infrastructure I forgot to mention, which I think is important, is the whole water issue in California. Is the water issue really as bad as feared, or can it be fixed by just constructing a few dams and legalizing desalination?
Well, it's actually worse than you're told right now. The concept of California was they had not only had droughts, but I believe it's in 1868. Remember Sherman's March to the Sea during the Civil War? You learned in school.
Yeah.
He was a general there. His first station after the Civil War was being provost in California. And I believe it was 1868, the Central Valley had 12 feet of standing water because they had one of these enormous El Ninos. And 2 years before, it had been a 3-year drought. So that's just California. And that's why California had to build massive infrastructure and did, because literally you could die. So you haven't built that infrastructure now. And there are 6 dams approved in the state of California. 4 would really be built predominantly by the Bureau of Land Management. 2 could be built by the state. But they're approved. All the environmental, all the regulatory is approved by the federal government. But there's no way to take cash from here and put it over to there, because not only is this state focused its spending on the cities, they've made about 630 constitutional amendments that guarantee dollars flowing to, I guess you'd say allies or whatever. It's just that you have this mess here. That's one of the reasons I'm being part of an effort to try to split the state called New California. So I don't think you can save it, Nick. I think it has to crash.
And before we wrap this up, what are some final thoughts that you'd like to share with my audience, which is mostly younger people who live across the world who are interested in finance and economics, about California and just the global macroeconomic future as a whole?
Okay, I'm going to say something really radical. I want you to put your hands on the 10 and 2 if you're driving right now. And I'm telling you, you're going to have an existential crash in California. And the other side of that crash will be the biggest boom in the history of the planet. And your generation will be the richest generation in the history of the planet. This is nothing new. I mean, California, before the gold rush in 1848, the United States had 6 economic crises. It had two Bank of the United States fail. It was absolutely a mess. And in the first year of the gold rush, California sent 40,000 ounces of gold to the U.S. Treasury. 400,000 ounces of gold to the U.S. Treasury. I'll take that back. It's so over a 5-year period, sent 400,000 ounces of gold to the U.S. Treasury. So I guess that's about 80 or 90,000 a year. The British Empire was run by the Bank of England, which had 60,000 ounces of gold. California paid off the United States, paid for all the railroads, paid for the boom. In the middle of the Civil War, California was funding everything. That died in the 1890s, and it came back with oil. That died, in the 1930s, and it came back in World War II with manufacturing. We made 40% of the ships and 63% of the planes. That boomed, and the auto industry boomed after, World War II. It died in the 1970s, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, California had Prop 13, which is the first tax cut in the nation. It caused a revolution. Reagan came in. He cut taxes. You had a big venture capital boom. And that boom is now ended. And we're on the other side of it, where we're going to have a crash in California. And no matter what people do, they can't stop it. And on the other side, no matter what they do, they can't prevent the boom, because America is going to re-industrialize. It's going to become, if not the largest, close to the largest oil and natural gas producer on the globe. So, you really have to sort of understand that you're about to do the 50s boom again.
So yeah, we're switching to industry then.
All has to be built, and it'll be more sophisticated. There won't be these big, massive, sort of, 5-mile long buildings they used to have. I mean, we've got, robots and technology and AI. I mean, it takes a lot of human effort to be flexible, and that's, there's a lot of advantages of the humans that no computer expert will tell you can ever be replicated. But we're going to do that. I mean, it's going to happen. All of the resources are here. We have the largest, copper mine on the planet. It's in Arizona. It's going to get opened. So all of this boom is going to happen, or you're going to get used to going back to having living around a campfire at night trying to find some wood.
Well, on that optimistic note, we're going to end it. And thank you for joining us, Chris. You probably have a few people who's more bearish on California than myself. So it's interesting to have that perspective. And with that, we're going to conclude this. Thank you, everybody, for watching.